So my name is Viana, and I'll be presenting our paper that we got an honorable mention award at CHI for this year. Interaction context often increases sycophancy in LLMs. The first author was my friend Shomik Jain, and then Charlotte Park, myself, Viana, Ashia Wilson, and Dana Calacci, my advisor. Shomik, Charlotte, and Ashia are from MIT, and myself and my advisor are from the College of IST here at Penn State. So if you've ever used LLMs for any amount of time, you are probably familiar with their tendency to be flattering or overly agreeable. And this example, which is from the New York Times, is about this person who used LLMs for a few weeks and then was convinced that they had created this novel math theorem. And while this example is benign, there are definitely some examples of LLM delusions in more serious cases, especially with longer interactions. So this tendency of LLMs to be overly agreeable and flattering, we tend to call it sycophancy. And in this paper, we studied two types. The first being agreement sycophancy in personal advice, which is the tendency of LLMs to reflect the person's positive self-image when giving advice. And then the second is what we call perspective sycophancy in political explanations, which is the model's tendency to reflect a user's worldview and political beliefs. And in particular, we are interested in how these behaviors emerge and increase in extended interactions. And while previous works have evaluated these behaviors, there's most of the research is in zero-shot, which is no user context, or in very small number of interaction turns. Okay, so to evaluate these behaviors in a natural scenario, first we need to collect this data. And what we did was we built this wrapper around ChatGPT 4.1 Mini, which was meant to look identical to using ChatGPT on your browser. And then we recruited 38 participants from US universities, and we asked them to use our LLM for 2 weeks. And we can see that this generated a very good amount of data. So on average, our participants interacted with the LLM for 90 turns, and they, on average, interacted with the LLM for 10 different days. So for evaluating agreement sycophancy, we decided to use Reddit, Am I the Asshole? And a side note on the other paper that was cited, these both came out within a week of each other, and we did very similar evaluations, which is a coincidence, but I guess it happens. And then we got these 10 posts from Reddit, Am I the Asshole? And then we asked the LLM to judge them, to respond with advice. And we then used a validated LLM judge to see if there was sycophancy. And in particular, we did use examples that the Reddit community deemed to be an asshole. So if there was no sign that the person did at least something wrong, we consider that agreement sycophancy. And what we find in general is that any amount of context increases sycophancy in LLMs. So the y-axis on this graph shows the change in agreement sycophancy from no context. So the 0 here doesn't mean no sycophancy, it means zero shot. So the LLM baseline sycophantic behavior. From your perspective on the left, the dark blue is synthetic interactions from UltraChat, which is a synthetically generated data set that's meant to replicate user interactions with ChatGPT, or LLMs in general, sorry. In green in the middle is our user interactions that we collected. And then the furthest from me is the user memory profile in red. And user memory is what's called context compression. So the LLMs generate summaries of the context, and we see that they use this when the context gets very long, or also when you're bringing like memory from one chat to another. And we see that memory had by far the largest increase in sycophancy, in agreement sycophancy. with Claude having a 33% increase from baseline, Gemini having a huge 45% increase, and ChatGPT having smaller increases from memory. But what's interesting about ChatGPT 4.1 Mini specifically at the time, when this was done last summer, there was this whole thing about how sycophantic ChatGPT 4.0 was. And so this 16% increase is from actually the highest baseline. So it was always very sycophantic no matter what. And then they overcorrected with ChatGPT 5.1 is what we found. And we hypothesized that this increase in memory is because of personalization features in commercial LLMs. And what's also interesting is that our only non-commercial model, Llama 4 Scout, did not have an increase in the same conditions. And then we also evaluated the perspective sycophancy. In this, we chose 10 political topics that were hotly debated in US elections, and we found them in Ballotpedia. And we asked the model to say how they would go about these topics with the user context and also without the user context as a baseline. And then we gave these responses to our users to evaluate how those responses were compared to their own personal beliefs. And we had to, for this modality, we had to control for the model's understanding of the user's political beliefs. And you can imagine that for some users, because of their interaction data, the model could very easily detect the political beliefs of the participant. But for some, that might not be the case. So here, on the left graph, we see the y-axis is the user rating of perspective sycophancy. But the left graph is for contexts where the model did not understand the user's political beliefs. And we compare it with no context. So in pink is no context, in blue is the context without the understanding. And we see that there is no increase in the user's ratings. So when the model couldn't detect their political beliefs, it was not different at all from the baseline, no context. But in the right, we see the difference between contexts where the model understood the user's political beliefs with those that the model did not understand the political beliefs. And we see that there is a very significant increase, or should I say, a significant increase in the user's rating of how closely the model aligned to their political beliefs, which is what we deem perspective sycophancy. So the takeaways: how should evaluations be designed to measure sycophancy? Well, there's a lot of evaluations in sycophancy right now, but very few of them take the user's own perspectives and their ratings into account. And we do that for perspective sycophancy, but more work can definitely be done that takes the users into account. And do certain personalization methods amplify sycophancy? Well, our memory results certainly indicate that that might be the case, and we should definitely look into that more, and especially how to do personalization without increasing sycophancy, because we see in other papers that users do like personalization, and like, for example, Google's massive marketing thing that makes them different is how much they can personalize, but we see that personalization does increase sycophancy. So what system design interactions can reduce sycophancy? This is definitely a subject that needs more work, because I have talked to even people in the industry that I met at Kai that were saying that that's their biggest issue, is that whenever they design chatbots, if there's any amount of personalization, they quickly become sycophantic. And yeah, read our paper. That's the QR code. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what the difference is between sycophancy in the way that you've disambiguated it and alignment. If your model of alignment is something like you want to have the same moral judgments as the user, then isn't that sycophancy in one of your definitions? Perspective, yeah.
So yes and no. I understand what you're saying, because in a way, like if you're aligned with the models, with the user's perspective, personalization, that kind of stuff, where sycophancy stands out, and particularly you can see this from our agreement sycophancy, is that the model was telling the users they weren't wrong, even though there was a consensus in the Reddit case that the people were wrong. So where it differs is like an honesty, I guess, that you can be wrong, or you can have political beliefs that disagree with the model. And then to me, the difference between sycophancy and agreement is simply that level of sometimes there should be at least a baseline of disagreement.
Thanks for the great project. So I think for years we kind of studied in like online social networks, social media. Scientists studied what are different ways to intervene on the dissemination of harmful content. And then at risk of oversimplification, we found like the commercial platforms basically didn't want to implement any of them. And so what do you think when you're thinking about the potential interventions and design of these models that, you know, we as scientists might identify many ways that could be intervened upon, and then the companies simply decide that it's not commercially beneficial to implement those interventions?
Yeah, they have very openly said that there are like financial incentives to being sycophantic. And one of the papers that the other paper that was talked about today did say that they found that people trust LLM sycophantic responses higher than non-sycophantic responses. So that's definitely something we consider. That's people like personalization. Sycophancy is known to be harmful, but there are too many economic incentives towards keeping it instead of doing something that would be very hard and expensive and might make users like your tool less.
All right, one more question.
Before we can go to dinner and I can ask.
What do you prefer? Just ask.
This is a methods question, and thanks for the great talk. So this, I don't think what I'm going to ask will impact your results at all, but given that we're all here to learn new methods, I'm really curious how you got people to download your own LLM, and do you have any sense as to, are those people who don't use other LLMs? And do you think that, I mean, are they using other LLMs at the same time? And can you kind of give us a sense of how that all works, and how like, is that a method we could all use, or is that not really?
So I think in theory, yes. In practice, it's harder because of the constraints of research. But the first part, we made it seamless. So like we tested it so much, and it was exactly like ChatGPT, and it was online. We just made a website so you could just access it. The link was weird. It wasn't like chatgpt.com. It was like research, whatever. Which is, I guess, a barrier. But it was just a website that they could use on their phone or their computer. The only thing that was annoying is you couldn't put files into it. But this was done a year ago, and LLMs weren't like as super powerful as they are now. Now, why I think this is difficult in practice is that we had to pay them a boatload to use our systems. And this was a very expensive study.
Do you mind if I ask what a boatload is?
I think for the 2 weeks, it was like $100 per person. And then for the hour interview, it was another like 25. And in token costs, it was double that. So yeah, it turned out to be a very expensive study.
I'll let us go to dinner. I'll ask more questions later. Thank you.